The photographic images of immigrants at Ellis Island, most known, are those taken by Augustus Sherman and Ellis Island, as I have just been discussing, both of who were known to be sympathetic to the plights of immigrant. This is a portrait of August Sherman, and this is Ellis Island, who is represented here later in his life with one of his cameras, obviously. Sherman began working at Ellis Island as a clerk in the executive division of the Bureau of Immigration in 1892. He was soon promoted to senior clerk and personal secretary to the Commissioner of Immigration, and in that capacity occasionally joined the boards of special inquiry, which actually met daily. During his lifetime in service at Ellis Island, between 1905 and 1925, he took approximately 250 photographs of immigrants, detained individual adults, groups, families, and children. In his position of authority, he had more time than those involved in the line inspecting immigrants, who at the peak totaled about 5,000 a day, and could take the time to photograph interesting arrivals. He enlisted the help of officials working in the line who would alert him of anyone he might be interested in photographing. Because of the time required to take a satisfactory portrait, the best candidates were those who were in detention and could therefore had time to sit for portraits. His studio in Ellis Island consisted of a folding screen from one of the medical rooms and served as the backdrop for interior shots. Other times he just used a sheet. For those immigrants whose detentions were expected to be brief, he photographed them outdoors, outside the main building, on a balcony, a lawn, or on the rooftop, which benefited from natural light. Although not formally trained in photography, he practiced the conventions of his time. For example, large families were usually photographed in ascending heights. We see the similar shots in photographs produced in Pier 21 and by other photographers, and in photographs produced by other photographers as well of immigrants at Ellis Island. The purpose to show the large number of families and just to show them in ascending heights. Other ways in which he mimicked the conventions of his time can be seen in his portraits of Reverend Joseph Vasion, a Greek Orthodox priest. He has two shots of this particular immigrant. The first one that you see here is just a close-up portrait, but the full one, which is a full-length portrait, shows him in what appears to be presiding over an unseen congregation. He has his arms kind of folded across his chest like this. His eyes are looking further into the distance, and he just looks kind of like murmurized almost. Behind him is a folding screen, and above him is light coming from a window, which emphasized the religiosity of the portrait. In a similar vein, he photographed a rabbi sitting down with a book. The book is open, and the rabbi looks like he has just taken a brief moment of contemplating whatever he was reading, which emphasizes the man's profession, knowledge, and respectability, all of which were contemporary conventions of portraiture. What is probably most notable about Sherman's photographs, though, is his interest in immigrant types, which point to the ethnographic portrait that classifies immigrants by racial, ethnic, and national difference. The images are identified by the nationality of the subject in the captions and emphasized by the detail of folk and headdress, folk clothing and headdress. This, for example, is a Ruthenian woman. That's how she's identified, followed by Guadalupe woman. There's a shot of 3 Guadalupe women who are also outside, photographed outside in full length. Sami woman from Finland and Thumbu Sami Hindu. Dutch woman, Italian woman. You get the drift, right? In each one of these portraits, you can tell a lot not about the person, but about what they come to represent, and represent by virtue of their clothing and the poses that they are subjected to. Sherman's emphasis on difference is expressed in various ways. For instance, although the images we have just seen suggest that he followed a pattern of portraiture in the indoor shots that was similar for all subjects, everybody was sitting down, he photographed them either straight on or at 3/4, and thereby allowed only the particulars of their ethnographic identity to manifest themselves in the photograph. When photographing other types of immigrants, he followed a different pattern, as we can see here in his photograph of a family of gypsies. He photographs them outdoors and in a more relaxed pose that is at odds with the rest of the portraits. In doing so, his portrait affirms stereotypes of gypsies as unruly, wild, and happy. There is an element of spontaneity in the mother's smile and the father's unkempt hair, as well as on the children's choosing to look away from the camera, as though they're looking at something that is far more interesting. The portrait was taken, sadly, while the family was in detention, and they were later deported. While it is interesting to note that they were denied entry into America, their image, their photographic image in America, is used to affirm a melting pot narrative in history. So they were deported, they were denied entry, but their image somehow remained. Other differences documented by Sherman's photographic gaze include various detainees who were also denied entry, like the German stowaways, wrestlers, and those identified as having physical abnormalities. And I'm just going to show you some of these. This, for instance, is the Russian giant compared to the Burmese dwarf. These are the German stowaways. Note that they're both naked, at least on their torsos, because they had very interesting tattoos, and this is what he wanted to depict. And we have a family from Borana, from Ethiopia. This is an image of a wrestler, and what is possibly most interesting about it is that if you look down here, you can see his pubic hair, suggesting that he's actually posing naked, which is unusual for the rest of the ones. Similarly here, we have another kind of muscle man pose of a different wrestler. This immigrant is identified as Mary Johnson, a Canadian who apparently dressed in men's clothing for 30 years. And in speaking of physical abnormalities, those who would be denied entry, this is a Hindu who apparently has he has certified for congenital deformity of the abdomen, with 2 arms and legs being joined to the abdomen in the region of the umbilicus. So in other words, he photographed freaks, right? Or freaks in quotation marks that would have been the object of scrutiny in freak shows. And again, we see subranio-pili on the right and 2 microcephalics. So these are the things, or these are the types of immigrants that fascinated him, especially in his later years, all of who were in detention and therefore had more time to sit and have their portraits taken. Sherman's photographs were never officially commissioned. It was not part of his job description, but it was a practice that was supported by the commissioners of the Immigration Bureau under who he worked. Commissioner William Williams, for instance, included some of Sherman's portraits in his annual reports, kept some for himself, and circulated them for articles about Ellis Island and immigration in popular magazines and newspapers, never attributing the photographs to Sherman. Without Sherman's consent or giving him credit, his images were also used as front pieces in anti-immigration publications, such as Aliens or Americans, where we have this front piece of 2 Dutch children. The picture of the 2 Dutch children accompanying the title Aliens or Americans, framing how you read this photograph, versus the collage of the new immigration. And we have the Statue of Liberty here, franked by a multiple of basic portraits that he took of various types, each one identified by the race that they belonged to, that was put together without his knowledge or consent.